Imagine being stranded on a stormy night, forced to take shelter in a rundown motel. The kind of place where the air feels heavy, and every corner hides a story you'd rather not uncover. A room number you can't forget, but apparently never existed. What would you do if the place you stayed in wasn't supposed to be there? This is the story of a traveler, an ordinary night, and a discovery that will leave you questioning what you believe to be real. Stay with me, because this journey into the forgotten motel room will chill you to the core. The rain started as a light drizzle, but quickly escalated into a torrential downpour that turned the highway into a blur of red taillights and glistening asphalt. I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, the kind of stretch where the gas stations were few and far between, and every exit seemed to promise nothing but darkness. I had been driving for hours, my eyes burning from the combination of exhaustion and the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers. The storm didn't help. It felt as though the heavens had opened just to force me off the road. The rain was relentless, and even with my high beams on, visibility was practically non-existent. When I spotted the flickering neon sign that read Motel, relief washed over me. It wasn't much to look at, just a squat, two-story building with peeling paint and a cracked parking lot, but I wasn't in a position to be picky. Pulling into the lot, I parked near the front office. The lot was almost empty, save for a beat-up truck and a minivan that had seen better days. I grabbed my overnight bag and dashed through the rain, the water soaking through my jacket in seconds. The lobby was exactly what I expected. Dim lighting, faded carpet, and the faint smell of something musty and industrial, like a mix of bleach and old coffee. Behind the counter sat a wiry man with thinning hair and hollow cheeks. He wore a name tag, but the writing had worn off, leaving it blank. "Room for one?" I asked, shaking the rain from my jacket. He didn't respond immediately, just stared at me for a moment before sliding a clipboard across the counter. His nails were yellowed and too long, and I couldn't help but notice how deliberately slow he moved. "Fill this out," he said, his voice monotone, barely louder than a whisper. I scribbled my name and handed the clipboard back. He took his time, flipping through a stack of keys behind him before finally selecting one. The key was attached to a plastic fob, scratched and worn, with the number 218 printed on it. "Up the stairs, last room on the right," he said, sliding it across the counter. "Thanks," I muttered, but he didn't reply. He was already looking past me, as if I'd ceased to exist the moment I had the key in my hand. The rain pounded harder as I made my way up the creaky wooden stairs. The building felt older up close, like it had been left to weather the elements for too long. The lights lining the walkway flickered, their buzz barely audible over the storm. When I reached the door to 218, I paused. The numbers on the door looked newer than the rest of the building, shiny brass that stood out against the chipped paint. For a fleeting moment, I considered heading back down and asking for a different room, but fatigue won. I turned the key and pushed the door open. The room greeted me with a rush of cool, damp air. It smelled faintly of mildew, but there was something else, something sharp and metallic that I couldn't place. I stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind me, and flipped on the light. The room was small and utilitarian. A faded floral bedspread covered the queen-size bed, and a single lamp on the nightstand cast a dim, yellow glow over the space. The carpet was a dull beige, stained in several places, and the furniture looked like it had been thrifted from a dozen different decades. I dropped my bag on the chair by the window and locked the door, double-checking the deadbolt. As I kicked off my shoes, I noticed how quiet the room was despite the storm outside. Too quiet. The heater looked ancient, a boxy contraption mounted beneath the window. I turned it on, and it groaned to life, sputtering warm air that barely made a dent in the room's chill. I told myself it was just another roadside motel, the kind where cleanliness and comfort took a back seat to affordability. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. The storm outside continued to rage, the rain slamming against the window in rhythmic bursts. The heater groaned periodically, its warm air doing little to counter the draft that seemed to seep through the walls. I tried turning on the TV for some background noise. It was an old tube model, the kind that hummed faintly when powered on. Most of the channels were static-filled, but I eventually found one playing a late-night infomercial. It wasn't much, but it was better than silence. As I lay back on the bed, my eyes wandered around the room. The phone on the nightstand caught my attention, a rotary model, beige and discolored with age. It wasn't plugged in, the cord coiled neatly beside it, as if it hadn't been used in years. The walls were bare, save for a single framed print of a generic landscape, a field of wildflowers beneath a cloudy sky. The glass over the frame was cracked in one corner, and the flowers looked faded, their colors leached by time. The smell in the room hadn't gone away. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger the longer I stayed. It wasn't overpowering, just persistent, like a faint metallic tang that lingered in the back of my throat. I tried ignoring it, but it gnawed at me. Then there was the window. The curtains were drawn, but the edges fluttered ever so slightly, as though a breeze were sneaking in. I walked over to check, expecting to find the window cracked open, but it wasn't. It was sealed shut. The latch was secure, and the glass didn't budge when I pressed against it. I stood there for a moment, staring at my own reflection in the glass. The storm outside was still going strong, but it seemed distant, muted. Shaking my head, I returned to the bed, trying to brush off the growing unease. The heater sputtered again, louder this time, and I jumped slightly at the sound. "It's just an old motel," I muttered to myself. "Nothing unusual." But as I lay back down, pulling the thin blanket over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not in the sense of someone being in the room with me, more like the room itself was aware. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of something falling. My eyes shot open, and I sat up, scanning the room. The TV was still on, casting a faint glow, but the sound had come from the corner by the table. I got up, my pulse quickening, and saw that my bag had fallen off the chair. That's all it was, a bag slipping off a chair. Still, my heart didn't settle. I checked my phone for the time, 3:12 a.m. As I climbed back into bed, I noticed something strange. My bag had fallen in a way that left its contents neatly spread out across the floor. My keys, wallet, and even a pen lay perfectly parallel to each other. I stared for a moment, wondering if it was just coincidence, before scooping everything back in. Lying down again, I felt sleep tugging at me, but something kept me on edge. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a sense that the room itself was holding its breath. Morning came with a faint light filtering through the curtains. I hadn't slept well, tossing and turning all night, plagued by uneasy dreams. As I packed my things, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was forgetting something. When I went to check out, the night clerk had been replaced by a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. I handed her the key and casually mentioned the odd smell in the room. "What room were you in?" she asked. 218, I replied. Her smile faltered. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "Yeah, it was upstairs, last door on the right." She frowned, typing something into the computer. After a moment, she looked back at me, her voice quieter now. "I'm sorry, but we don't have a room 218. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean? I stayed there last night. The key said 218. She shook her head. "We only have rooms up to 217. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to say. I thought about insisting, about walking her to the room and showing her, but something in her expression stopped me. It wasn't disbelief. It was something closer to concern, maybe even fear. I left without another word, my mind racing. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the motel, its exterior looking oddly different in the daylight. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to try. All I knew was that I would never take a chance on a roadside motel again.